The rain fell like cold needles that night, biting through torn cloth and broken skin, filling the air with the iron scent of blood and wet earth. Lena Asheville pressed her palms flat against the mud and told herself she would not cry. Not again. Not after everything the Ironmore pack had already taken from her. But then the howl rose from the ceremony ground behind her, low and triumphant, and every wolf in the pack answered it, every wolf except her. Somewhere beyond the black tree line, beyond the mountains that no pack dared claim, something ancient stirred. Something that had been waiting a very long time. They said the dark forest swallowed the weak whole. Tonight, Lena would learn that was not entirely true. The Blood Moon Festival had come to Ironmore Pack 3 years running without a mated pair emerging from it. Tonight, the elders had promised would be different. Lena had believed them. That had been her first mistake. She was small for a she-wolf, smaller than the unmated Omegas, smaller than most of the pack's children past the age of 12. Her wolf had never fully come. She had not shifted on her first blood moon at 16, nor her second, nor her third. The pack healer had stopped pretending to have an answer by her 19th year. She wore the gray sash of the unmatched, tied loosely at her waist, and she stood at the outer edge of the ceremony circle because that was where the unmatched always stood, far enough from the bonfire that the light barely reached her face. Alpha Crest Dunmore stood at the center, broad-shouldered and gold-eyed, with his dark hair swept back and his ceremonial furs arranged just so. He was everything an alpha was supposed to be. Lena had grown up watching him from exactly this distance. She had never dared hope. And yet something in her chest had tightened all evening. A pull she could not name, a warmth behind her sternum that she had not felt since she was a child sleeping beside her mother. 1:50 when the elder passed the bonding torch and the alpha began to walk the circle, every unmated female held her breath. He stopped in front of Lena. The warmth in her chest surged so violently she nearly gasped. Crest Dunmore looked down at her for a long moment. His gold eyes moved across her face, her gray sash, her too small frame. Something shifted in his expression, not warmth, not wonder. Disgust. He stepped back. "I reject you," he said, loudly enough for the entire circle to hear. "I will not bind myself to something that cannot even shift, something broken, something barren." The words landed like a physical blow. Lena felt the fragile thread of the almost bond snap inside her chest, a tearing, white-hot sensation that buckled her knees and stole the air from her lungs. She hit the ground before she could stop herself. "You are nothing," Crest continued, turning away from her already. "A stain on our lineage. The moon goddess made an error when she made you." No one moved to help her, not the elder women who had fed her at festivals since childhood. Not the young wolves she had run beside in their human forms when her wolf would not come. Not a single pair of hands reached down. They watched. Some looked away. Most did not. Lena pressed one palm to the ground and pushed herself upright. Her chest burned as though something had been ripped from between her ribs. Her vision blurred at the edges. She would not weep in front of them. She would not give Ironmore that. She walked out of the circle. Nobody called after her. The forest road ended at the boundary marker, a carved stone post hung with iron bells that warned wolves away from the uncharted territory beyond. The territory the packs called Blackwood. The territory they told children would swallow them whole. Lena walked past the marker without stopping. The pain in her chest was extraordinary. It moved in waves, each one worse than the last, as though her body was trying to process something too large for it to contain. Rejection sickness, the elders called it. In severe cases, she had heard, it could kill. She was beginning to believe those stories. The trees closed over her immediately. Old growth, ancient pines taller than the Ironmore longhouse, their trunks wider than 3 men standing arm to arm. The canopy blotted out the blood moon. The rain found its way through the branches anyway, slow and cold and deliberate. Her feet had been bare since the ceremony. Pack tradition. The ground here was not the kept grass of the ceremony circle. It was roots and stones and patches of frozen mud that cracked open when she stepped wrong. She was bleeding before the first mile. The fever came later, perhaps 2 hours into the dark, though she had lost reliable track of time. It started behind her eyes, a pressure, then heat, then a trembling in her hands that would not stop. The rejection sickness was progressing faster than it should have, as though something in her body was fighting it and losing badly. She told herself to keep walking. There was nowhere to go. She understood that. But stopping meant lying down on the forest floor, and lying down meant the cold would finish what Ironmore had started, and some stubborn part of her refused to make it that easy. She lasted another mile. When her knees gave out the second time, she did not get back up. The ground was wet and cold beneath her palms. Pine needles pressed into her skin. The rain had softened to a mist that curled through the dark trunks like something breathing. She was very tired. "I am not afraid," she whispered. She was not sure if she was speaking to herself or to whatever ancient thing lived in a forest this old. "I am not afraid of dying." She was lying, but it felt important to say. The growling started before she heard the footsteps. Low, wet sounds, coming from multiple directions. Not the clean, resonant growl of pack wolves, but the ragged, irregular noise of animals that had run too far from the order that kept them whole. Rogues. 4 of them, perhaps 5, circling through the trees at the edge of her vision, their eyes catching the faint moonlight in flashes of yellow and red. She had nothing. No shift, no claws, no alpha command in her blood. She was a girl lying on the forest floor with bleeding feet and a fever and a hole in her chest where something had been torn away. The nearest rogue stepped into the small clearing and lowered its head. Lena closed her eyes. She did not pray to the moon goddess. The moon goddess, as far as she could tell, had not been paying attention for some time. She simply waited. The ground shook, not the tremor of footsteps, something larger. Something that moved through the earth itself, as though the forest recognized a presence and drew back from it. The rogues felt it too. She heard them whine, a sound she had never heard a rogue make, and then the sound of their retreat, paws scrabbling on wet roots, bodies crashing through undergrowth, silence swallowing them whole. Lena opened her eyes. The wolf stood at the edge of the clearing, and it was not possible. She had grown up among large wolves. Ironmore's alpha wolves were substantial creatures, chest height to a standing man, dense with muscle and winter coat. This animal was something else entirely. It stood at the tree line like a piece of the dark itself had taken living shape. Massive shoulders, a coat so deep black it seemed to absorb the thin moonlight rather than reflect it, and eyes, pale silver, nearly white, that did not move from her face. It was bigger than any wolf she had ever been told could exist. It crossed the clearing slowly, deliberately. It moved the way very powerful things move without urgency, because urgency was for creatures that feared losing. It stopped 3 feet from her. It lowered its enormous head until its muzzle was level with hers, and it simply looked at her. She felt the warmth of its breath on her face. Pine and iron and something deeper, cedar smoke, ancient stone, winter air above the snowline. Then the shift began. She had seen shifts before, of course. Pack wolves shifted at festivals, during hunts, at celebrations. But she had never seen one like this, no awkward transitional moment, no brief vulnerability. The wolf unwound into a man the way a wave becomes water, seamlessly, completely, without apparent effort or pain. He stood. He was very tall. Broad through the shoulders, in a way that had nothing to do with ceremony furs, and everything to do with an entire life, spent as something formidable. He wore no shirt. The shift had taken whatever he'd been wearing, and his chest and arms carried the pale evidence of old wounds. 4 parallel lines across his left shoulder, something circular and deep over his right collarbone, smaller marks she couldn't count in the low light. His face was severe. Dark hair, jaw like carved granite, the kind of stillness in his expression that did not come from peace, but from a very long practice of containing things too large for ordinary faces. He was looking at her the way the wolf had, with that same fixed, unmoving attention, and there was something in it she could not immediately name. He knelt. Slowly, as though kneeling for him was not a natural position, and he was choosing it deliberately. He brought himself to her eye level and he studied her face. "What is your name?" he said. His voice was low. It was the sort of voice that had given orders for a very long time and no longer needed to raise itself to be obeyed. "Lena," she managed. "Lena Asheville." Something moved across his face, not surprise, something older than surprise. "Asheville," he repeated quietly. "Of course." He reached for her, and she almost pulled back, old reflex. The habit of someone who had learned that hands reaching toward her in the dark were rarely offering comfort. But she was too weak to move, and his hand had already closed gently around her wrist. The sensation was immediate and total. Heat, moving from the point of contact up her arm and through her chest in a wave that should have frightened her, and instead felt like the first warm room after a very long winter. The tearing ache of the rejection sickness pulled back, not gone, but suddenly distant, as though something larger had stepped between her and the pain and was simply blocking it. She heard herself inhale sharply. The word he said next was barely above a whisper, but it landed in her bones with the weight of something that had been true for a very long time. "Mate!" "No," she said immediately. The word came out hoarse and cracked. "No. That is not I was rejected tonight. Publicly, in front of my entire pack, I can't even shift. I am broken and barren and I am nothing, his words, not mine, but he was not wrong." "He was wrong," the man said, flat, certain, the way gravity is certain. "You do not know me. I know precisely what you are." He was still holding her wrist. He did not release it. "What was done to you tonight was a rejection of something that man was never equipped to understand." His pale eyes had not left her face. "Your name is Lena Asheville. Your mother's name was Seraphine Asheville before the packs drove her north. Your bloodline does not come from Iron Moor, Lena. It does not come from any of the lowland packs." She stared at him. "Your bloodline is older than this forest," he said. "Older than the pack councils. Older than the Blood Moon Festival and the territory markers and every tradition those wolves hold sacred. You carry the Asheville royal strain, the first wolves. The ones who ran before the packs were organized. The ones the moon goddess made her original compact with." Lena said nothing. She could not think of a single word that fit. "You are not broken," he said. "You were hidden. There is a difference, and the one who hid you will answer for it." She woke to the smell of wood smoke and pine resin, in a bed that was not a cot or a sleeping mat but an actual bed, deep and heavy, with blankets that smelled of cedar and clean, cold air. The room was large. Stone walls, high ceiling, a window with no glass that looked out on mountains she did not recognize. Gray morning light and the distant sound of wind through an enormous forest. A woman was sitting near the window, older, with a silver braid over one shoulder and the calm of someone who had seen a great many things and decided they were manageable. She introduced herself as Elda, the keep's head healer, and she informed Lena that the rejection sickness had been almost entirely expelled from her system during the night. "Your mate bond is strong," Elda said, in the tone of someone remarking on the weather. "Stronger than anything I have seen in 40 years of practice." He came to her that afternoon. He told her his name was Selim Vareth, Alpha King of the Northern Reach, and he told it to her without ceremony, as though it was simply a fact she needed to have. Then he sat across from her and told her the rest. The Asheville line had been the ruling bloodline of the first wolves, a strain so old it predated the concept of pack hierarchy. They had been the direct stewards of the moon goddess's original covenant. When the pack councils rose to power 300 years ago, they had collectively agreed that the Asheville line was a threat to their authority. They had not destroyed the line. They had done something more careful. They had scattered it. Lena's mother had been the last Asheville on record. She had been driven north by a coordinated campaign of pressure and ostracism from the lowland packs. She had hidden her daughter in Ironmoor, the last place anyone would look for royal blood, and she had used a masking ritual to suppress Lena's wolf until she was old enough to survive what the bond would bring. "The suppression is why you couldn't shift," Selim said. "Not weakness, magic, old magic placed on you by your mother to keep you invisible." "She never told me," Lena said. "She was protecting you, she would not have had time." He stopped. She died when you were 7. The pack records show it as illness. It was not illness. Lena looked at her hands for a long moment, then she felt it. Something in her chest that was not the rejection sickness, and was not the mate bond warmth, something else. Something that had been coiled behind a locked door for 19 years and was now quietly beginning to turn. The shift came without warning and without pain. Silver. Her wolf was silver, not the dull silver of old metal, but living silver, the color of moonlight on moving water, blazing in the stone room with a light that had no obvious source. Elda made a sound Lena had never heard from an adult woman before. Something between a gasp and a prayer. Selim's expression did not change. He looked at her silver wolf as though he had known this was coming for a very long time and was only relieved to finally see it confirmed. "There she is," he said quietly. "My queen." They gave her 2 weeks. 2 weeks to learn the shape of her wolf to practice the shift, until it came as easily as breathing to walk the northern reaches' high trails in her new form and feel the mountain wind through her silver coat. To begin to understand what her body had always been capable of and had simply been prevented from expressing. At the end of the 2 weeks, she came to Selim herself. "It is time to go back," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "Are you certain?" "Ironmore Pack is sick," she said. One of Selim's border scouts had brought the report 3 days ago, a blight spreading through the territory, livestock failing, the land turning cold and gray in ways that had nothing to do with the season. She had heard it and she had known, in the way she was beginning to trust her knowing, what it meant. The land does not accept a pack that violates the goddess's compact. My bloodline was part of that compact. What Crest Dunmore did broke something that needs to be set right. And, Selim said, she met his pale eyes, and they need to see what they turned away. They rode south with 60 of Selim's wolves, not an army but a presence. The northern reach wolves were different from lowland pack wolves. Older, quieter, the kind of stillness that came from genuine confidence rather than performed dominance. They moved through the forest without sound. Lena rode at the front beside Selim, and she wore no gray sash. Ironmore's border was visible from a distance now, not because of any marker, but because of what had happened to the land. The trees thinned. The grass between them was pale and dry in a way it shouldn't have been in early summer. 3 farmsteads on the territory's edge stood empty, their fields lying in rows of dead soil. The air smelled of ash and something sickeningly sweet, like rot just beginning. The pack wolves who met them at the boundary were thin. Not starving, but reduced, the loose-skinned, dull-eyed look of animals that had been doing without for long enough that the without had begun to show. They recognized Selim. The alpha among them, a young man, barely older than Lena, who had been given border duty because no one senior wanted it, went still and pale and dropped to one knee. His eyes moved to Lena. He did not recognize her immediately. Then something shifted in his expression as the mate bond's edges brushed against his awareness, that faint peripheral sense every wolf had for the sacred bonds of others. He dropped to both knees. Ironmore's main settlement was quieter than she remembered. The longhouse still stood, but the wood had gone gray and the carvings above the door had cracked. The ceremonial grounds, where the Blood Moon Festival bonfire had burned 2 weeks ago, was covered in dead grass. Even the stones of the fire pit were split. Crest Dunmore came out of the longhouse when the commotion reached him. He looked worse than the land. It was the most honest thing the territory could have done, mirror its alpha's condition back at him with perfect fidelity. He had been a large, gold-eyed, carefully arranged man at the festival. He was still large, but the gold of his eyes had gone muddy, and the arrangement had come apart. He looked like someone who had not slept in 2 weeks for reasons he didn't entirely understand. He saw Selim first. The recognition and the reflexive deference moved through him quickly, and then he straightened, because Crest Dunmore had always had pride as his primary instinct. Then he saw Lena. The silence that followed was complete. Lena Ashvale. He said her name the way people say things they are not fully convinced are real. "You survived the Blackwood." "I did," she said. "How?" "She had help," Selim said from beside her. His voice carried across the gathering crowd with no apparent effort. She has always had help, though it took longer than it should have to reach her. The crowd was growing. Pack wolves emerging from the longhouse and the surrounding buildings, drawn by the noise and the presence of 60 Northern Reach wolves in their territory. Lena recognized faces. The elder women who had not moved to help her. The young wolves who had looked away. She felt something she had not expected to feel: pity. They looked frightened. They looked hungry. They looked like people who had done a thing and were only now beginning to understand the true cost of it. "Your land is sick," she said, loudly enough for the crowd. "Your livestock are failing. Your border families have abandoned their farmsteads. You have been 2 weeks into a decline that will not stop on its own, and I think most of you already know why." She let that sit. What Crest Dunmore did at the Blood Moon Festival broke the compact. The land knows it. The goddess's covenant requires that the Asheville line be honored, not cast out, not humiliated. When he rejected me in that circle, he did not only reject a girl. He rejected the compact itself. A sound moved through the crowd, not protest, something more complicated. Recognition, perhaps, grief. Then one of the elders stepped forward. Her name was Marin, and she had fed Lena honey cakes at every festival until Lena was 12, and then she had stopped coming near her. Marin looked at Lena now with an expression of someone who had been carrying a weight for a long time and was finally setting it down. "There is something you should know," Marin said, "about what was done to Crest before the festival." The story came out in pieces, drawn from Marin and 2 of the other elders who had known. 3 months before the Blood Moon Festival, a trader had come through Ironmore, a man who dealt in rare herbs and told fortunes and seemed harmless enough. He had spent 2 evenings with Crest Dunmore in the Longhouse. After those evenings, Crest had changed. Small things first, short-tempered, dismissive, restless, then larger things. He had begun speaking of Lena in terms that no one in the pack had ever used about her before, claiming she carried contamination, that her inability to shift was evidence of a curse she might spread. The elders had not challenged him. They had not wanted the disruption. The trader, Marin told her, had carried the smell of black root oil, a suppression herb used in dark binding magic. And he had been seen, before leaving Ironmore, speaking to a courier wearing the colors of the Lowland Council. The same council that had scattered the Asheville line 300 years ago. Lena looked at Crest Dunmore. His muddy gold eyes had gone very still. "You did not choose this on your own," she said. "I know that. You were made into a tool by people who needed you to do what you did." Crest said nothing. Something in his jaw worked. "But you still did it," she said, "and the land does not make allowances for the reasons." He invoked the old right. She had not been certain he would. Crest Dunmore had not struck her as a man who believed in things older than himself. But the elders were watching, and the pack was watching, and he had pride where his judgment should have been. And so he invoked the challenge of standing, the ancient trial by which an alpha could contest a judgment before the moon goddess in the old way. Combat. Not to death, the right was explicit about that, but to submission. The pack cleared the ceremonial ground. Lena stepped onto the dead grass and she shifted. The silver light of her wolf rose over Ironmore's ceremonial ground like a second moon, and she heard the sound the pack made, not fear, not only wonder, but recognition. The deep involuntary recognition of wolves who had been raised on stories of the first wolves and had not truly believed those stories were history. Crest shifted beside her. His wolf was still large, gray-brown and heavy-shouldered, built for authority. He had been the strongest in Ironmore for 10 years. Against a lowland wolf, he would have been nearly unbeatable. He was not a lowland wolf. The silver wolf moved. Lena had spent 2 weeks learning her body, and she had learned it with the focused ferocity of someone who had been denied it for 19 years. She was not the largest wolf in the circle. She was not the most experienced. But the Asheville strain was not about size or experience. It was about something older, something woven into the blood at the level the moon goddess herself had touched. She read Crest before he moved. She felt his intention through the ground, Through some sense she had no name for yet, and she was already where she needed to be when his weight committed. It was not a long fight. 3 exchanges. The third one ended with Crest's wolf on his side in the dead grass, her silver paw on his throat, her weight sufficient and certain and without cruelty. He shifted back. She shifted back. She stood above him while he lay on the cold ground and looked up at her with his muddy gold eyes and something in them that was almost, finally, real. "You could have killed me," he said. "You should have. Death is too easy for you," Lena said. Her voice was steady. She had said those words before, in her head, in the dark forest, while she waited for the rogues and the cold. She had known, somewhere in the worst of it, that she would one day have the chance to mean them. "You are going to live with what you did, what it cost this pack, what it cost this land. That is not mercy. That is the heaviest sentence I know how to give." She straightened. "You will leave Ironmoor. You will go north of the boundary markers, outside pack territory, and you will survive exactly as I survived. Without rank, without name, without pack. If the goddess finds enough in you to forgive, you will find your way back to something. If she does not," she paused. "Then that is also an answer." She looked out over the crowd. "May you survive exactly as I did." Crest Dunmore rose. He did not speak again. He walked north without looking back, and the pack parted for him, and the forest took him, and that was the end of him as far as Ironmoor was concerned. The land began to recover within 3 days. The first sign was grass, a thread of green pushing up through the pale, dead carpet of the ceremonial grounds, right where her silver wolf had stood. By the third morning, the color had spread to the near fields, tentative but undeniable. One of the border farmers came back to his abandoned homestead and found his soil dark and workable, and his empty seed trays sprouted overnight. The pack did not ask her to stay. They did not have the standing to ask. But they came to her individually, quietly, before she and Selim prepared to leave. The elders, one by one. The young wolves who had looked away, even a few who had laughed. She did not absolve them. She also did not turn them away. She listened, and she told each one the same thing. The compact required them to honor what the goddess made. That was all it required. It was not complicated. They had simply chosen not to do it, and now they knew what that cost. She appointed Marin as interim lead elder, with authority to govern the pack until the goddess saw fit to send them a new alpha. Marin accepted the charge with the gravity it deserved and the slight relief of someone who had been ready to shoulder this particular weight for some time. Selim found her at the edge of the dead ceremonial field, looking back at Ironmoor's longhouse against the morning sky. "Ready?" He asked. She considered the word. Ready implied she knew precisely what came next: the Northern Reach, the Lowland Council, whatever confrontation was building in the north around the scattered remnants of the Asheville Compact. None of that would be simple. None of it would be quick. Selim stood beside her in the way he had already begun to stand, close enough that she was always aware of the quiet heat of the mate bond between them, steady and deep, and entirely unlike anything she had been told to expect from a bond. Less a chain, more a current, something that moved. He held out his hand, not a command, a question. She took it. "I have been searching for you for a long time," he said quietly. "Centuries of Asheville women lost in the packs, hidden or scattered or suppressed. I want you to know I would have waited as long as it took." "That is a very long sentence to fit in a single morning," she said. The corner of his mouth moved. "You'll get used to how I talk." She looked at their joined hands, then back at the forest. She had walked into Blackwood with bleeding feet and a broken chest, certain she was going to die on those roots. She had walked out with her wolf, her bloodline, her mate, and the beginning of something she did not yet have a full name for. It seemed sufficient. They turned north together, toward the mountains, toward the reach, toward whatever was waiting. The silver wolf ran. If Lena's story reached something in you, if you have ever been told you were too small, too broken, too nothing for the place you were standing, then you already know what this channel is for. Leave a comment below and tell me, would you have shown mercy, or would you have made a different choice? Every answer is worth reading. Subscribe if you are new here. There is a great deal more story where this came from, and the next one is already waiting. Share this with someone who needs to hear that the forest does not always swallow the weak. Sometimes it gives them back as something else entirely. Until next time, run well.